afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast State of the Balance from your host, Imperial Dane, master of everything. And so how's sort of the meta looking recently? I mean, sort of going from Ally to Axis, there's, some changes here recently, but, looking at the surge, for example, the meta is reasonably varied. I mean, you got conscript builds, you got penal tool builds. The penal tool was definitely very popular, both against Wehrmacht and Oberkommers, and particularly the Oberkommers, it's almost always what you see. In terms of doctrines, there's definitely been a shift towards not just guardsmen, but shock troopers as well. So, in that regard, things are getting a bit more varied. T-35s and IS-2s are still popular, but for example, shock rifle is seeing a notable increase in usage overall. So, there are some shifts in the certain meta. But again, I feel like things are heavily shifting towards penal trooper builds. And I know they may need to slightly tone down something within the Special Rifle Command. They'll probably look at the M3A1, since I feel like that one might just be a tad overtuned, could probably do with slightly less armor, so the Oberkommers stands a slightly better chance against it, so it becomes less uniform there, which I definitely feel like is one of the issues. It can become very uniform with Special Rifle Command. That, or maybe, I don't know, I feel like still the anti-tank rifles and the anti-tank sectors is a bit of a bad idea than the penal troopers personally, but I don't know. But beyond that, I mean, sort of in terms of variety and the sort of moves you might see a certain player do, there's a, reasonable amount of, variations. They sort of go for this, they go for that. It's not just all only go for this. But, again, I feel like the penal troopers in your Special Rifle Command could be in some way a tad overtuned. It could basically do with tuning down just a bit. Again, I'd probably look to the Scout car. They're just slowly lowering its armor, maybe, just again, so more bullets on average can penetrate it. But beyond that, I don't really have many other sort of, shall I say, immediate suggestions there. Moving onwards to the Americans, similar to the Surge, there's a reasonable amount of variety. We're seeing more recon support. Armor with assault units has slightly dropped off, but I don't think it's entirely gone, but it's certainly a lot rarer. Paratroopers are seeing a bit more usage. Heavy cavalry, though, is still one of the more popular, and so is mechanized. Very, very popular, in fact. Again, I might argue similar to the Surge M301, the Scout car there could do, or the Dodge truck could do with a slight turning down in armor, so it becomes a bit easier to manage. And so it doesn't become these very, so to say, swingy matches where it's like all or nothing in some cases. Like they can swing very hard around these light vehicles, and I think in that regard they could do again with a slight tuning down. Since while again the Wehrmacht can deal with it, with the Oberkommers, it's just further, so to say, reinforces the same few trite, stale strategies, opening up for more Oberkommando strategies, which I do feel like is a bit of an issue. Again, things become too repetitive, too fast, too easily. So I definitely feel like that's something that could do with a bit of tuning down. But beyond that, again, there's a reasonable amount of variety. Again, mechanized, heavy cavalry, airborne is seeing some usage, recon support, captains are definitely popular, pack houses are popular for once. But, lieutenants, stewards, all that, see plenty of usage as well. So in that regard, the Americans do feel, reasonably flexible. They can sort of go for several directions, and they're not just, forced into one particular strategy. Moving on to the British are definitely one of the problem factions. I think they've always been. They sort of suffer from too much gimmicky design, and that certainly also comes from their balancing. They sort of have to push down that. I feel like there's definitely some elements there that are too overtuned. In particular, I feel like the Universal Carrier is a bit too good, and you also can tell how good the infantry section. I feel like both basically are too durable and pack too much firepower for what they cost. Particularly when you also then consider the AC Mark III, which just sort of caps it all off. And while one you could get away, I think all three sort of makes it a bit too good, and so it just again makes playing against them bloody awful. It at the same time also makes it difficult to do anything to make the British more varied, because again you just give them just more and more stronger tools. So I feel like some of those elements too then at least need to be tuned down just a bit, at which point they could maybe look into making other things better. But I mean, for example, the infantry section, they nerfed the Bren guns, but it doesn't really matter. In most cases, they won't need them. They just need to bolster them, and apparently they won't touch the bolster. But I think they really need to touch the section some way. Either lower the DPS or make them slightly easier to kill, so they actually have to use the damn cover. Because right now, you get just hordes of Brits with bolsters just moving about, and in many cases murdering things, because they pack a lot of firepower now out of the cover. In fact, they can actually have a reasonably good chance of wiping an infantry unit. So I feel like they're overtuned by a great deal. And similarly, the Universal Carriers, like the other light vehicles in the early game, should not be bulletproof. Again, that one needs tuning down the armor similar to the M3A1 and all that. Again, it's too tough. Again, it just sort of swings games around it way too hard when you also factor in the self-repairs and everything else. Again, I feel like the Universal Carrier again needs less armor. I mean, if you can tune down those two things, and I think the AC Mark III will be fine, but right now as it is, it just feels like a bit too much of a overtuned packets that just, creates again these incredibly similar and not very exciting games where to the extent it doesn't even matter what you're doing at times because they just roll over you and that's it. So again, I feel like there needs to be some nerfs for the British. Again, they could maybe then buff into some other things, but also the Churchill tank could, I don't know, maybe do with a slight tuning down as well. I mean, you're seeing them a lot more than the Comet, and of course, so then compensate by maybe buffing the Comet a bit somehow, maybe, I don't know, probably making it a bit cheaper or more accessible that way, or maybe increasing its accuracy just a tad. I think that could do a lot there for the Comet, since it does have a tendency of, missing a bunch, but I'd overall, though, again, look into improving something somewhere, and again, just nerfing some of the early elements, because right now it just creates this super hyper-aggressive faction a lot of the time. And part of the issue, of course, is a bit with the Wehrmacht, in fact, with the machine guns, is they're not actually designed for supporting the faction. They're just too slow to compass them, more designed for offensive faction. In case of the British, if you're going offensive, you're just, getting a lot of infantry sections anyway. So in that regard, the machine guns just don't fit very well the faction. Of course, that I think is part of the British issue in particular, but where, like with the Wehrmacht, they just decide to straight up just really buff a lot of the early game things to sort of compensate heavily, whereas with the Wehrmacht, they're finally getting around to buffing the Austrian, but that's about it. Well, a few other things, but anyways. Moving on to the Wehrmacht, there is some, the British doctrinally, there is some variety, but it does tend to fall a lot on the same few doctrines, like, Vanguard, Commandos a bit here and there, and otherwise, whatever, Mobile Assault Flamethrowers. I guess there is some variety, but in other ways, less so. As for the Wehrmacht, German infantry is definitely sort of one in a lot. Stormtroopers definitely seeing usage with some players, that with others. Jaeger infantry remains popular. Others, Lightning War, Spearhead, or Mechanized Assault Tigers certainly remain popular. Though again, they also remain, I think, somewhat tricky for some players to get their hang on. So again, a lot of people just end up wasting their Tiger tanks. But some players have definitely shown they can do it. So while there's some, variety there, the overall issue, as kind of with the British, I think part of the issue remains the machine gun just doesn't fit the rest of the faction. It never did. It didn't do it in Company Heroes 1. It doesn't really do it in Company 2. You'll see sort of how most players just go for one MG42. If they have to, they'll go for two. But if they can get away with it, in some cases, they'll straight up skip going for MG42s. Despite, again, they're ostensibly meant to be core of the Wehrmacht. But the problem is they do not work with the rest of the Wehrmacht. Again, when you have just so many things where things can just come completely wrong in just a matter of seconds, the MD42 is just too cumbersome and just too slow, and I think that's sort of one of the main issues, which I think has sort of just been haunting the Wehrmacht forever. Again, the machine gun just isn't good. Again, it packs plenty of firepower and suppression, but it cannot react to things, and again, that makes it highly risky because, again, one mistake, one bit of RNG or anything, and it's just useless. If you can take out the MD42 as an allied player, in a lot of cases, you've usually got an upper hand up, because if they're using it, they're to an extent relying on it, and if it's gone, again, they're in a really bad spot. Obviously, there's not much you can do about that, and straight up just, I think, redesigning the entire MD42, which I don't think you're going to see at this point in the game's lifespan, so I don't know. Theoretically, they could buff it, but, at this point, they're better off just buffing a lot of other things. And again, we're getting the Austrian buff, we're getting Panzer gun, these receiving a light buff and some changes here and there, which is nice. Who knows, they might even buff the Tiger a bit. So, there are some improvements. Also buffing the Stuga. I'm not really sold on that one. I feel like they need to improve the armor, at least improve Veteran 2 so the armor that way becomes a bit more worthwhile, because right now, Veteran 2 for the Stuga is kind of rubbish and doesn't really do anything. And I do not like things that don't do anything. And those are the points where you just have to wonder why they're there in the first place, if they do anything, so I really wish they'd do something about that. Obviously the Austrian buffs plus the Pan's going to change. I think it's going to give the Wehrmacht a lot more options. It's going to give the late game a bit more. Particularly buffed Austrian is going to give the Wehrmacht some of that comeback ability. Since one of the problems has just been a lot of their late game stuff just tends to be incredibly lackluster, and that tier 3 stuff, has to be in some way, kind of a bit more punchy to compensate for the early week early game. In fact, the MD42 is kind of, again, just doesn't fit the rest of the faction. Again, it's not a very good defensive machine gun. Unless, again, your opponent doesn't, know how to flank and just insist on attacking for a small bottleneck, in which case it's the world's best. But again, in any other situation, the MD42 kind of falls flat on its face. Like a fat kid with asthma that's trying to run a marathon. It just doesn't work. And you think it works, you got issues, mate. Moving on to the Oberkommando West, sort of the aggressive faction, obviously, again. Problem is, at the moment, I feel like at the moment it's incredibly a lot of Lux, Puma, Command Panther style. You'll see the few things in there. There used to be more Jaegers and all that, but right now it's just Lux, Command Panther, Puma Command Panther story in like the vast majority of the cases I'm seeing. Most of the doctrines just aren't seeing any usage comparisons. And part of the issue is just it's too easy to stall for a Command Panther. Like, it's way too easy. It should not be that easy. Again, I think they just need to increase the command points on that one if they don't just straight up scrap it, because really, I mean, Special Operations is, in a faction that I would say is really poorly designed. That doctrine is really poorly designed for a really poorly designed faction. Otherwise, I'd probably look into slight nerfs to, I know, the Fultz Company is just something needs to be tuned down just a tad, maybe compensate elsewhere, but I definitely feel like Fultz Company spam is also just a bit too easy and a bit too prevalent, and in that regard, they probably need to do something about it elsewhere. So that would sort of be my immediate thoughts there as well. Just sort of, help open up for some thoughts there. I mean, so again, I think that sort of really covers it. I mean, there are some changes, there's some variety in there, but we sort of look at, like, I would say the two, rubbish factions, the British and the Overcomers, things are very much the same and not particularly interesting and exciting, and the Wehrmacht sort of kind of struggles, in part because everything gets, balanced against the Overcomers and not the Wehrmacht, which has really left the Wehrmacht in a sore spot. When you also factor in the MD-42, just doesn't make sense for the rest of the faction. Again, in the same way that, putting an asthmatic fat kid to run a marathon does not make much sense either. I'm sure it makes for a really great, inspiring, movie until, except of course for the part where they don't show, again, him dying afterwards in a ditch somewhere north of Stalingrad. So I think that sort of covers here the state of the balance for this month, or sort of the last couple of months. So that's sort of roughly my thoughts. Again, I'm liking some of the changes coming up here with the balance pack. Some of the commanders looking interesting. They do feel, if I gotta point out, an observation bunker in something that's supposed to represent fire brigades, for the Wehrmacht, makes absolutely no sense. Again, it's sort of roughly on the level of asthmatic fat kid running a marathon. No. Just no. So that sort of, roughly covers it, that little bit as well. Some people are interested in my thoughts on the commands. Again, obviously lots of things are changing, which makes it a bit hard for me to say much about it. But again, observation bunker, no, just toss it out in the bin. Just go away. I don't like it at all. So I hope you enjoyed this little video and my thoughts on the balance, and a bit also some thoughts on some of the upcoming balance changes. Hopefully there'll be some more, and hopefully again the Stu gets, some better armor one way or the other. So if you haven't, subscribe, like, share, comment, tell your friends, tell your family, but don't tell your enemies. And if you like what I do, you can donate or pledge on Patreon. Links in the video description. Every donation allows you to keep making more and more of these videos. So do consider, because YouTube certainly isn't helping. Cheers, everyone.